You know something's irreplaceable when you buy it for a second time. Now, not for a second time because it broke, it's because I'm an idiot and I left it in my backpack when flying, so someone in Edinburgh Airport scored themselves a really cool multi-tool. Now, I've had Leathermans for over a decade now, and it went with me all around the world. It was one of those EDCs that lived in my backpack full time. And it kind of never failed me. So when it was taken away at the airport, I was thinking, well, let's look at some other options and see if there's anything that would fit that category of EDC that's not too big, but kind of does everything I needed to do. And looking at other Leathermans and other brands, I kind of boringly went back to the Wingman, because when it comes to the form factor, the weight, and the features I need, like need from a multi-tool that lives in my pocket or my backpack, this kind of does it all. And to be fair, the other ones were either a little bit too expensive for what they are, or at least I couldn't justify that spend given what I'm using these for, or they were just too big or too bulky or too heavy. This kind of fits the bill best. The Wingman has been on the market for, oh my god, I don't know, 15 years, 20 years, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's been tried and tested, and I know there's a lot of reviews out there, but I just want to chuck in like everyday usage versus people who go and hunt bears with these things. There's a lot of EDC videos lately, and you can tell there's a lot of people who are overestimating how often do you actually need these things, and how many tools do you need in one of them, and how robust they have to be. For me, this is just a handy way of accessing the essential tools, like the screwdriver or the knife, or sometimes the package opener, but I don't find myself using it that often unless it is a very delicate parcel and I know I can't cut too deeply into that, then that thing comes out. Or the wire cutter when I'm working on the van. It just feels like this kind of a do-it-all tool, but in the same time, I don't treat this as my tool, if that makes sense. If I'm traveling locally, I always have my van and I always have my toolbox with me. So I've got the proper big-ass tools to do the big-ass jobs. Whereas this is just for the tiny little things that I need to do on the go. Having said that, I've got another little tool that I've used forever, and it doesn't replace the Leatherman or doesn't replace your multi-tool, but this little guy, the Nipex. I mean, look how tiny this thing is. And it kind of, I know it looks silly and it looks like a toy, but this thing does most of the things I need to do around the house or in the van. Size-wise, they're not that much different, but the weight-wise, this weighs nothing. And it's pretty versatile. Look how wide this thing goes. When it comes to kind of day-to-day usability, if you don't want to carry something like that, this is a really cool thing to have. But when it comes to the kind of multi-tool aspects, I couldn't find any better replacement to Leatherman. So let's have a look into what's inside. Obviously, there's two tools accessible from the outside. So first thing, you've got a knife that's lockable. It's semi-serrated, and I know some people don't like that. I just found that these type of knives, they stay sharper for longer. So the 420AC steel isn't maybe the top performer here, but the previous knife I had, it was 10 years old, and yes, I had to sharpen it up a few times, but it survived 10 years. I mean, I don't expect things to survive that long. The other side has clippers. Now, those scissors, again, they're lockable, they've got a spring action mechanism here, and I don't find to use them that often unless there is like a paper thing to cut through, because anything thicker than that, it just slides out, and this little lever, it's just so tiny, it kind of cuts into your thumb. So these are not as useful as I thought they would be. They're kind of useful when you need to cut through the tape or something like that, but anything like cables or anything thicker, they just don't work. And I find myself using the knife for most of these tasks anyway. Now the pliers are super handy. They're spring-loaded, which some people say it has its drawbacks. I couldn't really find any. They just work as pliers. When it comes to wire cutter, now, you've probably seen this on the other reviews, that these little guys, I'm not sure if this is going to be clearly visible here, but they just don't touch, right? There's a tiny little gap there, and I thought this would be an issue in the past, but they actually work pretty well. On thinner cables, it's just no bother, you just cut straight through them. And on the thick one like this one here, these were not designed to do that, but they still cut through the guy with a little bit of wiggling. It's not the type of cable I would necessarily use these on, but just to show you that this kinda works on that as well. And then you've got the tools that are inside. You can either use your fingernail to take them out, just like so, or you can push from the bottom, from here, and just push them out, and then prop them up. You've got your can opener with a wire stripper. You've got a file here. And in theory, there's a ruler here that's really not useful for anything, apart from maybe measuring depth in your tire thread. The good thing about that tiny little guy is that there's a flathead screwdriver bit here that I use more often than the actual flathead that's included on the other side, which I'll show you in a second. This package opener comes in very handy. You can use a knife, but then if you cut too deep, you're probably gonna destroy whatever's inside of the parcel, whereas this little guy opens it up without wrecking the rest of the contents. So these outside tools are not fully lockable, but there is a spring that holds them in place. So you have to apply some force to fold them. It's not the end of the world. Probably if you're really fighting against a screw or something, that might lock on you. And I think, I'm not sure because my previous tool was so old, but this feels way more solid. I just kind of start getting loosened a little bit after a while. If that happens, there are torque screws that you can just tighten up. And I just kind of appreciate the simplicity of this. On the other side, what you've got is your Phillips screwdriver, which is fairly thick. So if you need to do any precise stuff, that's just not going to cut it. But it's not nearly as thick as the flathead. I mean, thing is thick, man. It's good for prying stuff open, but there's very few screws that I can actually use this against. So the file tool normally comes out to tighten up slightly thinner screws. If I would have a criticism about this, is obviously the usability for scissors is very limited. That thick flathead is, again, very limited use, but also when you're using the pliers, I just would love for this to be a little bit more grippy. I think I'm just gonna put a little bit of extra tape on the grip, so when you really need to have some leverage, this is not gonna slip out. And also, some people complain about this edge here being too sharp, potentially cutting into your hand. I don't know how soft your hands have to be for that to happen. Again, I've used the previous one for 10 years, never had an issue. I don't get these things for free, I buy them myself. So if you want to support the channel, will leave some Amazon links below. It helps to make this channel a little bit more viable and making those videos as well. But I'm also not saying that this is the tool you should get. The question you really need to answer yourself is how often are you going to use these tools and whether it's worth spending extra for a bigger set. Or is the basics just enough? Or is this little guy enough? This kind of does everything I needed to do for all the small jobs I've got around the house or when camping or going for surf trips. Things like walking through the woods and having a massive tree in your way and going all Chuck Norris on it. Or messing up your van and having to zip tie it together. Or the casual kidnapping scenario. Alongside of this little guy, because holy shit, I honestly wasn't expecting that I'm gonna be using this as often as I do. There are loads of really good multi-tools out there. I'm just saying that this one fits the bill best, because first of all, it's fairly affordable. The previous one I had, the one that got confiscated, I think I got it for 30 bucks. Now, these are about 69 now, which is double or way over the double the price what I paid in the past. But what isn't right now, anyway, right? These still are a fair bargain, because I've looked at loads of multi-tools and some of them are asking for about 200 bucks. This is supposed to be just like a handy in your pocket thing that's not replacing any of your proper tools, which you probably have in your toolbox anyway. This is just a supplementary thing that you can just take out and do tiny little jobs around the house. So spending 200 bucks on EDC is just not something I'm really keen on doing, but obviously this is just my use case. I'm pretty sure you know what you need those tools for. Do a proper research and see what kind of tools you would be actually using on a daily basis, and just think how many scenarios you'll actually need them for, because spending extra 150 bucks on something you're gonna use once or twice a year isn't really worth it, whereas this has most of the essentials, or even this little guy. The other great thing about Wingman, it is pretty small, and yeah, it is fairly basic, but for the 10 years I never, well, maybe not never. I did miss this saw a few times when I was going camping and had to cut down some branches. So, man, that would be useful. But then if I'm going camping, I don't do tents. So I know some people will go like, oh, this is not real camping, mate. Maybe it isn't, but I've kind of refused to sleep on the ground. I like my van, I like my diesel heater, I like having a fridge in my van, and typically I've got a big toolbox with it as well. I think that's everything from me. Have a good one, and I'll see you in the next one.